What's going on, guys? It's your boy Beats by Ash coming at you with another banger of a video. And today I'm going to be bringing you guys 3 ways you can prepare for the upcoming first offline One Piece regional. Now, a lot of this transitions well into online regionals and treasure cups, so keep that in mind. But regardless, I'm giving you guys a ton of free value like no one has ever done before. And because of that, I'm going to have to ask you to pause the video, smash the like button, and turn post notifications on so you never miss another opportunity like this. And as well, follow me over on Twitter, guys. Guys, my Twitter was hacked. At Beats by Ash on Twitter. Get my follows up. That's one of the best ways you can contact me. And as well, if you're interested in getting better at the game, make sure to message me over on Discord at Beats by Ash Official. And as well, my server will be linked in the description below. Shout out to one of my students who recently got 10th place at an online regional. A straight up demonstration of how I'm adding value to people's lives. And without further ado, let's get into the goo. The first way that you can prepare for the offline regional I'm going to talk about is understanding and comprehending the overall tournament structure. So the way that these tournaments work is they are typically 7 to 8 rounds of Swiss, which means you complete all of these rounds without getting knocked out, no matter how many losses you have received, while you ideally would want to have 1 or less losses depending on how many players are in the tournament, because that would typically qualify you to move on to the top 16 cut. Now, when we get into the top 16, this is where things get very, very different from your normal locals or other tournaments you've participated in, and it very much changes the deck that we should be selecting to bring to the event. So in set 1, we saw a huge rampant success with Eustass Captain Kidd, and that is because in order to reach 1 or less losses in an 8-round event, this deck gave you the most prominent chance of consistently seeing a fair opener that allowed you to express skill and win more games. And what I mean by this is the deck had access to not 1, but 2 infinite value searchers. Not the kind that you just put on board and get 1 search like Nami, but the kind like Jewelry Bonnie, which allows you to turn it sideways every single turn, giving you incremental advantage that ultimately becomes your opponent's downfall. And on top of that, some of the most unfair cards in the entire OPO1 meta were also supernovas. Because of that, we saw a massive amount of success of people reaching the top 16 cut in order to go on to win the tournament, which is required. Because of that, we saw a massive amount of success with the Eustass Captain Kidd deck in the top cut representation for most of our treasure cups in the English version of the game. Well, when you're in this top 16 scenario, you also have to encounter for the new change in time rules. And what I mean by this is, in a normal circumstance, you would go into what is called turns, 0, 1, 2, 3. Essentially, both players are getting 2 turns once time is called, and then you go into certain other tiebreakers if the game has not ended, but I'm not going to go into that because that's pretty self-explanatory. Well, in the top 16, this rapidly changes because instead of a 35-minute time limit, we are given a 60-minute time limit to complete not 1, but a best 2 out of 3 series of games, and whoever wins, 2 out of 3 of those games obviously wins, but this is where it gets weird. If the game were to end in game 2, and I am the person who won game 1, I automatically win the match. There is no turns, there is no time extensions, and this just creates some incentives for some malicious intent. Now, I am not advocating for this, so make sure to not clip this because, I'm giving out free value. But anyway, basically, what I mean by malicious intent is that if you win the first game, you can essentially just sit there and discard your entire hand if the clock is going down, and you can easily see that. And then even though you discarded all your cards and you took 4 damage and I'm at 5 life, you automatically just win the game because the series wasn't completed, and you can do that in a lot of legal manners that I'm not going to go into deep strategy of being a fuckhead. But basically, my main point about this is it very much changes the type of deck that you want to bring to these tournaments. Because not only do you need to bring a deck that has a very strong chance of consistently allowing you to play the game for 8 rounds, but once you get into top 16, you also need the deck to do well in best 2 out of 3, and you need to play fast. So for example with this, in the Eustace Kid mirror match, I had this come up several times for me. I saw many people who spoke out about this that were in the top cut. Essentially, the first game in the Eustace Kid mirror match would take about 30 minutes, even though both players are playing very fast and are not stalling in any way. And so what this does is, now the guy who won the first game is at a large advantage because the person on the back foot has to go for a risky strategy to try to close the game out early, or they will just lose by default time rules. And this is important to understand if your intent is to win the whole event and not just top the event, which are two very different things. So automatically, there are certain strategies that can be disqualified based off of consistency if your entire goal is to reach the end of this tournament. And on another link to that, there are also certain strategies that are disqualified in my mind, which do not have the opportunity to play as fast as others if they were all on an equal ground of card quality. So for example, in a vacuum, let's say that Zoro is equal to Eustace Captain Kid on a power level scale and how strong it is in the meta. I would prefer to play Zoro because I am more confident in my ability to close out those games in a best 2 out of 3 series, regardless of whether I win one of those games or not. I can very sure make an assumption that the game will end in time for us to complete all of our games, and that's important to me because my intent is to win the whole event. If your only goal is to top the event, then that changes what kind of deck you would want to bring. A good example of this is the Green Kinemon strategy, which a lot of players in the Asia community very much regard this deck as a very strong choice to consistently top at a large event, while it becomes very difficult to win the whole thing. And the reason for this is, the deck is very consistent at what it's trying to do. Ideally, your game plan is to open up a turn 1 Okiku or turn 1 Raizo while on the draw. Well, when you take that out of the equation, there are going to be a few games in your tournament experience where you are going to be on the back foot because you did not open up one of these openers in your starting sequence. And when we break into the top cut, it is even more difficult to say that you will open up a 1 out of 8 engine on your first turn in 2 out of 3 of every best 2 out of 3 match. And when you don't see that, it's almost like you're going second for little to no benefit, putting you in a terrible situation to win the entire tournament. Honestly, I am very much surprised to see a recent online regional be completed with a first place Kinemon finish, but that is neither here nor there. So the first strategy that you should implement when preparing for this upcoming offline regional and other online regionals in the rest of the Paramount War competitive season is understanding the landscape of these major tournaments and making your deck choice adjusting to these constraints. Keep that in your mind. Now I'm going to move on to the second strategy I have for you guys to implement, and that is understanding the meta that we are in and making a wise deck choice based on what you can reasonably expect to see. So in these past online regionals we have gotten so far, and as well as in the Asian meta that is practically the exact same as us, just 9 months in the future, we can very much dictate that I will see a good amount of Green Kinemon as well as Red Zoro. In a couple of our online regionals that had data displayed, we saw that over 100 players in both of these deck categories were attending these events. So in my mind, I can reasonably assume that I will play against 3 to 4 Zoro and as well 2 to 3 Kinemon, as these are the two most widely played strategies in the OPO2 meta. Now this is very important because when I'm coming to these events, I want to make sure that my deck is able to either go 50-50 or better in both of these matchups, or I'm going to be having a very hard time. Now, in a vacuum, this immediately disqualifies certain choices that have strong matchups in other places, such as the brand new Navy Black deck. In my mind, I do not think that is a wise choice to bring to one of these events. Now, somebody's going to say, Beats by Ash, well, someone won an online regional with a Navy deck. Okay, anybody can win with any deck. We are not going by outliers here. We're making our decisions based off of sheer probabilities and statistics. I could win with a full deck of vanillas. That doesn't mean that it's a good deck. Just because I high rolled you doesn't mean that that is the best choice to bring to these events. So my point is, black is a deck that is very strong versus Kinemon. So if you are meta calling that you are going to play against mostly Kinemon in these 8 rounds of Swiss, then you have a very high chance to succeed. But on the other hand, we have seen that red has 4 viable decks in the OPO2 meta. Number 1, Zoro. Number 2, Luffy. Number 3, Whitebeard, both variants. And number 4, Red-Green Law. 3 out of these 4 deck choices match up very well versus the Navy Black deck. And for that reason, I am not interested in testing this deck. When you see what Zoro does versus a deck like the Navy deck, it's very hard for you to win no matter what way you try to angle it. And that is because the red deck in general has a very good opportunity to overflow the board and replenish it faster than the Navy deck can handle, as the Navy deck's form of removal is all single target, which is great and dandy versus the green Kinemon deck, which looks to put up big threats, but versus red, you're just going to die before you get to do shit. I mean, let's be real. So if you go to this tournament and you think you're just the best black player in the world, you can't get mad because Beats by Ash told you here that you're going to expect a lot of red, and the guy hit a gum jet pistol in the life on your Borsalino during your turn. Don't get frustrated at me. Don't get frustrated at the other guy. Just be pissed that you didn't get better at the game over on Beats by Ash's channel. So the second tip that I have for you guys is understanding the OPO2 meta and choosing your deck accordingly based off of probabilities and what you can expect to see. So in my mind, I am looking to play a deck that is able to beat red as well as green, because this is pretty much the entire meta. And now I want to lead into my third strategy for you guys to implement for preparing for these upcoming events. And that is understanding how the mirror match affects my deck choice. This is something that a lot of players very much overlook. And that is because when I'm looking at a deck like Zoro, like Kinemon, while I do think these decks are very high power level, I want to make sure that if I am choosing Red Zoro, that I am able to differentiate my deck in a substantial way to give myself a competitive advantage over another player in the red mirror match. Now, a lot of people will say, Beats by Ash, well, the Zoro deck has a lot of micro decisions. Okay, so it has a lot of micro decisions. That doesn't mean that all of your games will be dictated by these micro decisions. There are a couple of key examples of this. Number 1, the player who's going first, if they open a Nico Robin on turn 2 and get to kill something on the following turn for free, you're pretty much blown out of the water. A second example of this is when the person going first has 9-cost Edward Newgate on curve, it very much swings the entire tempo of the game in that player's favor. And for these reasons, I do not like this deck as a deck choice to bring to these large events. Now, I'm not telling you to not run the deck, but personally, I don't want to lose to these factors that I cannot control based off of sheer representation. Now, we're in what I like to call a rock, paper, scissors meta, a very advanced form of that in that regard. And what I mean by that is, like I said, the red deck hard counters the black navy deck, and as well, blue counters red, and so on, so on. So there are certain choices that you have to make based on what you expect to see, because certain things beat other things in the rock, paper, scissors tournament. Well, when we can expect to see 3 to 4 other Zoro players, I just reasonably do not think that you can differentiate the build enough from that player in order to gain a competitive deck building advantage. Let's go off the deck. Okay, you need 4 Nami, you need 4 Rush Zoro, you need 4 Nico Robin, 4 Curly Dan, and a plethora of other cards that we don't have time to talk about. You are not cutting any of these cards because the power level of the red card pool is so damn high that 90% of my deck is going to look like 90% of your deck, and that's just something I'm not interested in. So whenever I look at other choices, such as my red Luffy deck that I showcased in a previous video, this deck is nice in that regard because I am able to run certain cards such as Gum Gum Red Hawk, which allow me to differentiate myself in the red mirror match because they will almost always have a target for me to kill, and as well, protecting one of my other valuable characters is an awesome investment for only 2 Dawn. Now, these are factors you have to consider when choosing a high-level meta deck that is going to be highly represented at these tournaments. Now, the other route to this is something that I have much always chosen to do in other games, which is bringing a deck that potentially has good matchups against these decks, but does not have a, per se, best mirror match, or is not likely to be seen. So a strong example of this would be the Purple Kaido deck. A lot of people in the Asian meta found great success with the Purple Kaido deck at large events. I think there was actually one guy who won some kind of preliminary tournament and made it to the finals, and in those events they just split, so he basically got first, and basically he was saying that Purple Kaido can go 50-50 in almost every matchup, which is amazing, and especially it covers certain areas that it did not have in set 1, which it has a increased ability to combat the red Zoro deck, which is even more popular now. Now, this is a great choice when you are the only one on Purple Kaido. While it lacks in the mirror match skill expression capabilities, that is not as much of a factor. Now, I may be mad when I go against another Kaido player and the other guy has Island and I don't, and that allows him to snowball out of control and ultimately defeat me with little skill expression, but can I reasonably expect to see more than one other Kaido player? I do not think so. If you do think so, you are a madman and you're probably not going to win anyway. But ultimately, these are the decisions that I'm trying to make you think about because this is what's going to lead to you ultimately seeing better results in these tournaments. So my third strategy for you to implement in order to prepare for these events is understanding how does my deck fare in the mirror match if I am choosing a tier 1 meta choice that is expected to see a fair amount of use, and if this mirror match is not that good, I have to rely on my RNG capabilities, or I need to choose a deck that better combats the meta, but has a weaker mirror match, or is going to be less represented as a whole. Now, there's not always decks to choose like that in every meta. Sometimes we have a tier 0 meta, and you just have to play that deck, and you have to express as much skill as you can. But currently, with the limited card pool, there are as well many limited options into what deck choices are available. But one thing I have found is in this meta, the meta is very much more diverse on what you can use and what you can do, rather than OP01, where it was largely dominated from a consistency standpoint based on use as Captain Kidd. We have other decks which have received new forms of searchers, which add up additional consistency to those strategies, such as Red now having access to 2 searchers in the form of Curly Dedan, Law now having access to Curly Dedan, which gets Nami as well, which just made the deck even more consistent than it really needed to be, or even Blue getting the new 1-drop Doflamingo. There are several good choices to bring into these major tournaments, and I'm excited to see what people are going to be capable of. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to smash the like button. Guys, let's get the video to 100 likes and I will release my top choices to bring to these competitive events. And I'm out here giving out free value just to make everybody better. As always, if it's not the goo, it's got to go. Peace.
Ooh, is that indigo?